Hi, Steve Gillmor, Gillmor Gang. Guests or gang members or fellow co-conspirators. The first chuckle goes to Kevin Marks.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome. The second non-responsive chuckle goes to New York, to the Center Square, John Borthwick.
Hey, Steve. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. And Scoble will not be with us. They took his phone away, and he doesn't have any Wi-Fi or anything. He's being strafed by the, what do they call those guys?
The Microsoft police?
Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds.
Yeah. And that voice is John Toshek. Welcome, John.
Welcome. I have Wi-Fi and a phone.
Okay, so
Just one?
John Borthwick, what's going on since we last talked?
Since we last talked. We've had a busy week this week, so I've been focused on sort of immediate things. We've had a couple of launches and stuff, but there's a lot of CES stuff that's happening. And so I've been watching that from afar. I don't know if any of you were in Vegas, but I think it's an important year because I think that last year was the sort of the end of the TV era, and it felt like CES had sort of peaked as a big TV, 3D TV, 4D TV, everything TV show. And this year, at least from afar, it feels like I'm sure there's a zoo out there. I'm sure it's peaked in many ways, but it feels like from afar that it's starting to shift, and that there was a lot of the single-purpose devices that are beginning to pop up at CES. Mostly in that sort of the small vendor marquee or tent or football field or whatever it is there. And so I've been watching that, kind of intrigued with that, because I think it's interesting. There's sort of new stuff coming out there. So that's stuff I've been looking at this week.
So it's the appification of CES, is that what you're telling me?
Appification. I'm not sure so much appification. One of the areas which I'm fascinated in is these unipurpose devices. That they're not all single purpose, but they're fairly simple devices. Usually hang off our smarter devices, but they're hardware. And a lot of them have gone through. Quite a few of them have gone through Kickstarter, but some of them are coming out of traditional companies. But they are, there's many of them are health and fitness related. Some of them are viewing related. A lot of them are gaming related, and a lot of them are sort of creation tools. But seeing all of those things come out of CES, all the new watches, all the new health stuff, all the new stuff which you're going to be able to attached in sort of a hub and spoke environment to your smarter phone or tablet. So it's hardware, simple hardware.
Well, when I say application, I'm basically saying the single purpose model as opposed to the portal model.
It's hardware as an app, right? Yeah.
And do you think that's got to do with the fact that apps are everything and that the web is dead? Waiting for the grimace from Kevin.
No, the web is.
I'm losing your audio here, John.
You hear it now?
I think it's bandwidth more than anything, but go ahead. We'll keep trying to hear you.
Okay, so let me see which Wi-Fi I'm on. Tell me I can switch Wi-Fi networks if it's bad. But the internet's not there. The web is the web, and the internet is the platform, and the web is one of the primary endpoints to that platform. I mean, I think that we're seeing. The web look more like apps, and we're seeing apps look more like the web, and hardware look like something in between. So I don't think, I think that we can do better on this show than sort of the headlines that media and the blogs love. I don't think anything's dead.
Well, I think that's optimistic of you, but that we can do better. Uh, so that'll be your burden since you brought it up.
Link bait. I mean, okay.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with link bait. Just ask Mike Arrington. John Toshak, what do you think? Do you sense anything from afar about CES, or has it been pretty much of a non-entity?
I've been pretty much removed from well, because I'm not there. It seems like the stories that are coming out that resonate with me are like a lot of the show is used as a launching pad for things that aren't necessarily going to come out in 2013, but they're gambles on 2014. These are the 4K and 16K televisions. There's the, I guess, BlackBerry. I actually don't know if RIM was there, but the BlackBerry News came out around the same time as the version, the 10. Coming around. That's not going to do anything this year, I don't think, unless they strike up some gigantic deal with a carrier. And what else? The interesting things that are going to come out are very specific things like the Fitbit, or more and more things around sensing, and that portends for something like more around the Internet of Things, and becoming more of the Internet of Reality, and that goes to your point about, well, it's not the web. You may access the web, but the web's been deprecated a lot to one of the distribution channels rather than the predominant distribution channel for things that are appearing. The Internet is necessary. Port 80 is still necessary, but the web part is not the primary target for these new devices.
Kevin Marks.
I think there's a couple of things going on. There's the assumption that devices need to be connected now, and that's showing up. But we're also that some of the manufacturers don't quite get what they're doing. And there's an Economist piece today complaining about Sony's camera that tries to treat Wi-Fi as a proprietary cable connecting Sony devices rather than actually connecting to the other devices that are around, and missing the point that actually it'd be quite nice to be able to use your high-res iPad as a viewfinder for your camera, for example. So we're going to start seeing the practicality of these things connecting up, but then we run into the problems of finding the nearby ones and all the fiddly issues around that and making that stuff interoperate. So that's going to take some debugging and fixing. I also saw Samsung launched a set of web JavaScript APIs basically for their phones, which was so that you can turn Bluetooth on and off from web apps and things like that, which starts to make some sense, but it's not really worth doing if it just works on one or two Samsung devices, even if they are the biggest selling devices. You really want to push that stuff into, we'd like to turn the Bluetooth on or off from the web apps on this and on the iPhone and so on. So we're starting to see these things plugged together, but getting them actually converged into something that works across multiple devices always takes a bit longer.
Well, I think that's a lot where identity comes into play, and identity on mobile devices. When you couple identity and a management and your mobile gateways or your mobile environment, so you can provision the mobile device through an identity service, then you can build all kinds of apps. It could be a web app for managing all of your tools, your phone, what it's used for. It could be also used for managing like your Nest. What do you call those things? I forget what they're called. To control your HVAC in your own house.
What was it, John?
So thermostat. So I mean, I think all these things you're going to have an identity, and that identity provider is going to be a key part of this. So that's a very interesting point that you brought up. I think that's going to be coming around this year, probably toward the end of the year.
But I think that, Kevin, I'm hoping, and John, I'm hoping that the mass proliferation of these devices, gives more, increases to the sort of gravitational pull of the open architecture of the open web. because I think that there will be, large manufacturers who will start, trying to develop end-to-end solutions that fit together with their TV and their phone and their thermostat. But these single-purpose device makers, realize that they're in the business of building one thing and doing it really well, but that the user wants to be able to move that data across multiple services. So, I mean, I remember Rob Scoble did an interview with the Oakley people that's on his website that I saw, and if I remember right, their data is fairly open, or if not completely open. For their ski goggles, the data vision piece of the ski goggles. And so I think that the proliferation of these devices actually pulls us into more of that open architecture. At least I hope it does, because I think that that's the only way we're going to accelerate a lot of the data use of these of the Web of Things, Internet of Things, and the massive devices that we're going to adopt and play with. And specifically at CES, I mean, there's a lot. I think John Tashek's right. There's a lot of stuff that's shipping in a while, but there's stuff that's coming out soon, right? So I mean, I was excited to see the Pebble Watch, which is an Android-based watch that was on Kickstarter. Has shipped a little bit late, but I think it's a pretty interesting product. So I'm excited to see that and get one of those. And there's a couple of other watches that I thought were really interesting. There was one which came out of a Danish company that is it's geared towards sports usage and running, but it has an incredible GPS and mapping capability right on the watch. There's another one which was aimed at parents and kids, which I thought was interesting, where you can give your kid a watch and then they can telephone. It's got a radio in it, so they can actually make phone calls to 5 people in it. And so it's kind of a limited use of data and a phone designed for kids, but it also gives parents the ability to sort of geofence their kids and say, this is the radius that the kids can, go play, and if they go outside that radius, ping me. So,
it shocks them if they go outside that radius, right?
That's what for the pets. I think the kids.
Oh yeah, that's right. Children as pets.
Yeah, you can't use pet
The
collars
Cat
on people. It's kinky, but I don't think there's a law against it.
I wish. Yeah. Steve, you'll have us wired up one day. So.
Sorry?
You'll have us wired up one day, so that if we're talking too long or prattling on, you can give us a shock. So.
That's my job.
You heard her.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you done? Are you done with your litany of open widgets?
Open crappy app hardware.
Yeah.
Well, but it's becoming an issue with the, particularly with the self-tracking things, where I can't remember which one it was, but one of them there was a big fuss recently because you couldn't actually get the data out of it, and they wouldn't even delete your data unless you cancelled your account. So there's a bunch of suddenly you take this self-tracking gadget that knows exactly where you are and how many steps you take each day, and then suddenly find it's uploaded all its data to some website and they won't give it back to you. So that people are starting to experience that problem, which is something we've seen with other big websites about you've got my photographs, and that's starting to impact on that. So as you try and move between, you say, oh, so you had the Nike shoe thing, or then you had the Fitbit. It's like, now I need to actually make these things commensurable and see if I can fit them together. That's when trying to people suddenly realize that having this in a more open format will be handier.
Correct.
But I mean, how do I say this quickly, as opposed to every show for 7 years, which is, isn't there something to be said for economic and kind of popular leverage in terms of developing technologies? I mean, we understand that the web is a very powerful thing, but if the web is dead, he said it again, then, is it possible that, while we wait for this, paradise of interoperability that never actually occurs, that we could have a tremendous amount of innovation that would come out of just plain, apps starting to cooperate with each other.
Well, I think the web is not so dead yet. I think the web as we know it is kind of dead. But when you look at these gigantic touch screens that are being developed, and these the table, the touch table, that the only way to really get that to be a good use case is if you have a touch-based, HTML5 style interface for it, and that could be the new web. It may be application specific, but it could do other things too. So I think that this kind of this text-heavy, banner-driven, static, faked out by a couple pieces of dynamic content, I think that part is kind of going away. But there's kind of reemerging as a new thing. I just think that is going to be superseded by huge volumes of application-specific components like the Fitbit or the shoe or whatever. The problem I see with some of those devices and the lack of openness that Kevin and John were mentioning are that they develop the technology for technology's sake, and they don't look at the use cases first. They look at the use cases after, and it's much better to have the use cases up front, so that you can explain why that technology is important.
Are there ravens descending on you, Kevin, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted.
If they've got messages tied to their legs, I'll let you know.
Oh, the bells, bells, bells! What a tale their terror tells of despair.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the only thing I remember from 7 decades now. John Borthwick, are you going to take the bait on what I asked you? No, seriously.
No.
You're not?
No, because you contradicted yourself, Steve.
How's that?
You said it's as I understood it. You said, well, tell me again. Give me the bait again, and let me see if I can
web
make
is
a chew
dead.
on it. Because
web is dead.
Yes.
Apps are dominating.
Yes.
They're now taking over hardware.
Yeah.
Okay. And
But you finished with this open, collaborative.
yeah, I mean, you've got these. I mean, if you look at the world through, a window such as this device, and everything else that doesn't go through this device you don't see. So this becomes the universe.
Yeah.
All right. So what's in here? These little apps are basically little windows inside the window, right?
Yeah.
This device and the Nexus 7 and the phones have taken over. The Mary Meeker graph shows, the number of devices tipping over to this platform, which is iOS and Android. So it's not HTTP. HTTP is one of the protocols that displays information, right? It's like a JPEG, HTTP, etc. Oh, you're gonna go ahead,
Kevin. This is for you.
No, he's gesticulating visually.
So the point is that some of these windows are more open than others. So if you open one of the windows, it may just give you one thing, but if you open the browser window on there, that lets you connect to everything, because the thing inside it is generative and can be configured to do many different things.
But my point is that I understand the open argument. What I'm saying is that this other thing that happens, like if you go to Harvard, then you can get into the room when they're playing the high stakes poker game. Where the money goes is where the action is. And when people, look where Netflix came out of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
it came out of mailing DVDs, but yeah.
Yeah, but it came out of nowhere. It came out of a corner turn, an edge condition in the windowing, pardon the expression, strategy of HBO, etc. Okay, and it is challenged in terms of achieving a critical mass and then holding on to it long enough to survive the content cartel trying to crush them and push it back to HBO. All right, well, aren't we so look at the web as being the TV windowing system, and apps and this iOS/Android platform as being the new Windows, OS, and you start to see something that's a lot different than open versus so-called closed. It's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
So it's John.
John's locked up.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that I think it's a different ball game, but I think that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're locked up, but it's good. Okay,
you
great.
can hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think that it may be a different ball game, but it's still it is very much in flux. I mean, you use the analogy of TV, and I think that the TV cable distribution model sort of has been fixed for a while. I think that this world of apps and this as you are framing it, this sort of new distribution model is still very much in flux. And so I think in 2012 you saw mass proliferation of apps. People moved from a directory hierarchy-based navigation of those apps to search. The notifications layer became a hugely important means of being able to access all those apps, because you suddenly have too many apps on your iOS or your Android desktop, and so notifications became the primary means of navigation. I think the ambient data collection layer also emerged in 2012, and I think we're going to see a ton of that in 2013.
Okay,
and
what's that? What's the ambient data detection layer? It sounds like Homeland.
It's highlighting those apps, right? It's apps that are sitting there in the background and who are looking at your data and who are trying to either do sort of anticipatory information to you, which they then push through push notifications, like you should meet this person because they're nearby to you right now and you may be interested in meeting them. Or even just simple anticipatory things like if you see the Dark Skies app, which tries to sort of anticipate weather conditions, or there's a set of apps which are emerging which use the data that they have on the device and collect data about you and then push you information around that data set. And what we'll see is, I think, is now the battery life, data management, cross-app management is getting better on these devices. I'm going to think you're going to see a lot of really interesting things happen there. And again, that gets pushed into the notification layer.
Okay, great. All right, so I take your point, and I'm glad you sort of circled back to the notification thing, which
we've ended up where you wanted. So
yeah, well, that's the unification of this new platform, and we've discussed in the past the hope or surmise that eventually iOS and Android will, notifications will talk across that particular chasm. But for now, you learn that the differences between those notification layers on each of those two sub-platforms are minimal. So, if you're on Android, you get most of it, and if you're on iOS, you get most of it. So, and people learn how to be able to multiplex between those things. And, Gmail as a email notification patch currently ties together a bunch of the different services like Foursquare, etc. You get, and also Chatter and enterprise traffic. So you've got this thing here. So is there a possibility that we can now start talking about this as the new Windows, and instead of talking about this concept of the web somehow being, isn't the web just basically didn't it start as a visual layer on top of the internet?
Well, it's not as a textual layer, but a persistent textual layer. I think that was the big difference. It was that you had documents that were up there all the time. So the web started out as, if I go to this address, I will get this thing, and next time I go there, it'll still be there. And that was the thing that was different from Usenet or email or the communication things we had before, where the assumption was you would download them and read them locally, whereas the web was like, okay, we'll just go and get this thing next time and it'll still be there. And then that became dynamic over time, and then it became more visual. But yeah, that's a big chunk of it. Then the other piece of it that's important is the abstraction of the visual, so you can express things in HTML, and multiple devices can render them possibly in different ways because they've got different size screens, or some of them originally couldn't do images or whatever.
But within the app infrastructure and tied together by notifications, you have that absorbs web content as well.
It does to some extent, but it depends how good they are at cross-linking, and this is one of these things where there is the iOS Android tension, because the Android ones can cross-link fairly well, and the iOS ones can only cross-link to the 4 or 5 that Apple builds into the operating system, and beyond that you're on your own. And you basically have to build out every possible integration with every possible app, which reduces the number of integrations that happen. So there's that structural problem when you're building apps that are between iOS and Android that differ.
But that's like saying that when you argue that point, you fail to recognize the dumbing down of the least common denominator aspect of the number of cooperating apps which don't depend, for example, on any kind of business model that would tend to push them to one or the other of the platforms. I mean, it's not. There's no free lunch here. This so-called open capability. It only goes so far. I mean, if I want to put something up on my TV, I'm stuck on Android, right?
Well, there's ways to do. No, you don't.
Somebody was talking. I don't know where it was. We've been in analyst meetings all week, and so it might have been something from an analyst meeting. But somebody was talking about how they were sitting somewhere and. They put something on, a song came on, and it went right through to their over AirPlay and was on their speakers. Do you remember that conversation, John?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, but I don't remember where that was from.
Yeah, I don't either.
But yeah,
to me, that's a real. The user doesn't really care whether or not it's 5 point applications expressed as apps that have different screens with which to display the content type of that service. They don't really care about that. And particularly if you use a 4-fingered swipe on iOS, you basically diminish those things. And over time, as I think you've been suggesting for a while, starting with Android and then moving to iOS, we're going to see much more interchangeability, between these different content types. But it's like 2 different approaches. One is to boil the ocean and make everything fit into this web paradigm. The other way is to forget the web.
It's the way around.
Okay.
No.
Explain.
No, because boiling the ocean problem is I have to enumerate everything and make this and solve every possible problem, whereas the web model is I will define some loose interconnection point, and we can redefine what bits fit mean over time. So the problem is if you say we're going to make this, so the AirPlay thing is great, but it means you have to have an Apple device attached to every television and the television tuned to that channel all the time, and you have to just use Apple devices or the hacky couple of things that do it on others.
It's what they used to call the strategy tax at the Windows or Office
so
tax.
In some ways, it's the next 20-pin iPhone connector, which created this sort of flurrying of devices, and then suddenly Apple had to break it because what they were trying to make didn't fit with it anymore. And so now, when there was only one iPod, you could have physicals. It was about that big, and you could plug the thing into it. And suddenly, something this big comes out, and none of the devices fit anymore. And that was, so what one of the trends I saw at CES from some of the bits and pieces I saw, and I wasn't there either, but I was watching what come by, is moving away from everything having one of those connectors on it and the assumption you plug them in to everything connecting over networking, and then there's a battle over what networking they use for that. But Bluetooth has actually been picking up quite a bit there, and Bluetooth is a bit of a rat's nest of exactly how it's defined, but it lets you end up having to define point-to-point protocols for lots of different things. But they've defined enough now and there are enough devices out there that you're reasonably likely to be able to connect an arbitrary one of these tablet-y things to speakers or something like that over those. So that layer has been absorbed. The video piece of it is still hard, and that hasn't been completely settled yet, and that's still going on. So yes, there's an advantage at the moment for the Apple thing, but there's
that's not a coincidence.
But there's still a sort of centrality problem with the way AirPlay works.
It's like when people talk about HTML5, and it's like, well, when it catches up, there's one little problem with it catching up. Exactly. Well, that's another.
What's it going to catch up with? It's already ahead. Okay, when the Retina display came out, all the HTML stuff worked, and every app had to be patched. You now have SVG available on all the browsers and all these things, which means you can do high-resolution vector graphics that fit every screen. Every app still has to be patched to fit the different ones. So some shiny new app comes out, and because I don't have an iPhone, because I have one of these that's big, I get the sort of black borders of death all around it, and it makes me feel like I'm, my window to the world is being constrained through somebody's keyhole. That's what it feels like to me. Whereas I use the web stuff, it now tends to fit, and that's. The web has done a better job of that, partly because it was designed to be generic in the first place, but also because it stops you from making the I will only be looking at this on one device assumptions a lot of the time. Google did that this week. Google started blocking Windows phones from Google Maps, and that was like, what? How could you do such a thing? That's evil. And there was a huge storm about it, and it was clearly them being dicks to Microsoft for the sake of it, because their maps do work on Microsoft devices. So there's the spirit of the web thing there. Whereas if they had to, they're perfectly fine to say, well, we're not going to build a version of our app for Microsoft devices.
Are you saying that the spirit of the web is being a dick to Microsoft?
No.
I'm not sure I understand.
Microsoft has the spirit of the web now too. That's been the encouraging thing over the last 2 years. But no. The point is,
it's a ghost of itself, but they get the spirit of the web.
So Google can say, we're not going to make a Google Maps app for Windows Phone because we don't care. And that's reasonable. That's like, that's your engineering resources, sure. But if you've already built a web version of this app, to then say, and we're just going to break this on Microsoft's devices, that's an exact analog to the it's not done till Lotus doesn't run tactic of the 80s.
So in other words, it sucks to be web friendly.
No, what?
I understand.
From whose point of view?
Every sentence I understand, but the total message. It seems to ignore this pesky thing called reality.
No, I'm saying the reality is not the reality you're seeing, because you're looking through your one glass window rather than
exactly. I like that window. I like it. It's comforting. It's simpler. I mean, John Borthwick, isn't this what you were talking about when you said these single-purpose devices? Isn't that the the subtle message of the day is people are comforted on some level by simple, this is what this thing does.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Steve, I think that this is a debate. I think that most stuff is academic. I think we're moving sort of concurrently in this, there's a closed vein and there's an open vein that move in parallel together. And I think that that's just the nature of what we're doing and what we're building. Right. And
so let's hear about the stuff that isn't open for a minute. What is
it? So look, I mean, Kevin was talking about Google. I mean, Google did remarkable things on the app side in, last year, right? And so, they've sort of systematically marched through the iOS apps and put out better apps than Apple in most every category, right? I still use the Apple email client or app on my iPhone. But if Google would, get Sparrow, it will turn Sparrow into something that they were going to support, I would use that in a minute, right? So the calendaring app, I use Google. The Maps app, I use Google. And, they're even offering cross navigation between their apps, right? So I use Chrome on iOS. And, there's this really interesting sort of little bit of cross navigation. Whereas if you're in the YouTube app and you click a link, I think it was Rich Greenberg who uncovered this, but if you in the YouTube app and you click a link and it goes to Chrome, it pops open Chrome, but then in Chrome, you suddenly get a piece of Chrome that says, go back to YouTube, right? So Google, they're creating, using open tools or the tools that they have access to, they're creating a semi-closed little ecosystem on top of Apple's fairly closed system. And so I think you have these successive layers of open and closed that are playing out in the marketplace. And we do it all the time at BetaWorks, right? We're trying to, in building startups and building new companies, we're trying to find ways to get in and develop an edge and build a business that has that can be sustainable. And so it's I think that the very structure of the open web is sort of, I think is the point I was making about the small devices, is that I think that they add gravitational pull to the open side of the equation. But I think that this is not an either or, this is an and it just keeps moving back and forth.
Okay, well, I'll accept that as a roll-up of both sides of the coin. It seems to me that I find it more interesting what you were just saying. For example, why would Google want to push to bring up a requester, as I understand it, and tell you to go back to YouTube? What does that mean?
So when you're in the YouTube app on iOS, right, and you're watching a video,
right,
and there's a link in that.
Right. Now I understand going that direction. That makes perfect sense. It pushes you to, opens it up in Chrome.
Right, and then when you're in Chrome, there's a link in the Chrome, the navigation of Chrome, that is now exposed that says go back to YouTube.
Okay, I get it. So in other words, it's basically saying, don't worry, you can get back from here. It's a back button across operating systems.
Across apps that retain state, right? It's Kevin's point.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't go back to the top of the frigging app, you go back to where you were.
Okay, so how do you, as a developer of products, do you then take the next step, which is to provide one experience that is consistent across an iOS strategy and also is consistent across the Chrome Android interface? And is that possible yet? Do you understand what I'm asking?
No.
Well, I'm just trying to close the loop to this notion that the web is somehow a more powerful tool than actually. I mean, it sounds like a hack, basically. Apple doesn't want you to do this, but they've released the ability. They've allowed Chrome into the OS, into the device.
But the thing is, it's they put a one-way valve on it effectively, because you can't, if you click a link in anything else, it will go to Safari. It won't go to Chrome.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of what Google's trying to get around, right, Kevin?
Yeah. So Google is having to work around that by making special magic Chrome connected links, and then seeing if they don't work, then it'll make a Safari link. And so it's adding extra busy work in effect, because you have to do a Chrome : link or because an HTTP : link will not go where you're expecting it. Whereas the Android one, each app can say, I support this subset of URLs, and then if more than one can do it, it gives you a choice, and you can make the choice sticky.
John Tajek, can you actually go from one app to another and stay inside that walled garden, regardless of the device you're on?
One app to another?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? What's an example?
In other words, I'm trying to suggest, or I'm asking, anybody can answer me here, including the chat room. Can I can I just avoid this web thing, which ends up with these problems of being locked out from being able to go back and forth? And can I just stay inside an app architecture? So, I want to do something else. Can I go direct and open up another app, which comes to the foreground, and I'm in that app and I do whatever it is there. And in that app, the only place that it will let me go is to go back or to another app that supports this new environment. That would seem to me to be a more secure, economically controllable environment than trying to endlessly hack this web interface.
Well, no, it's the other way around. I mean, it's not secure because you've got to build everything. You end up having to build the Microsoft Office suite because you want to control everywhere everyone goes, rather than giving them a way they can open documents in more than one app to work on them.
You're making my point in reverse, which is that this, Office suite turned out to be a hugely powerful engine, which has propped up Microsoft for the last 20 years.
Right, but by imposing costs on everyone else, because then you spend all your time fucking around with different versions of Office to try and get the documents to render properly.
Yeah, as opposed to not being able to do it in the open web.
No, in the open web, where actually the document form is specified in a rational way rather than in that's what the code did last time.
Rational, okay.
No, I mean, there's a really good interview with Ian Hickson up this week that I'll dig out for you later, where he's talking about the process of designing HTML, and he says, yeah, we keep making mistakes, and then we have to deal with it. But the way we deal with it is finding more than one person trying to implement the same thing and making sure they're consistent. And if we can do that, we're getting it right. And if we're not doing that, then we should just delete the thing because we're doing it wrong. So because the process has been defined from the point of view of this needs to work with more than one person set of stuff to begin with. And that when that's your core design goal, that means that you've got the ability to do that in future. Whereas the Microsoft version was, we'll add new features to this version, and everyone will pay us taxes to get that new version. And that worked for it worked for 10 years or so. But it's become increasingly fatiguing for people trying to actually get something done.
Okay.
If you go back to the early days of Office, before they had MOM, the Microsoft Office Manager that kind of cross-linked files, each system was somewhat closed, and they had just implemented copy and paste. But there used to be kind of a cottage industry for companies. Like one of them was Xerox, which made something called Metaphor, which would allow you to link documents together so that you could pull in an object, say like a PowerPoint object or an Access object inside your Word document. And we're just seeing the same as, to me it was, a mistake in all these new environments that are coming out with the way people want to work. And I think it's a huge mistake. And they're also doing it on the web. And what people really want to do is just have everything kind of open up so they can do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, that's what people want, but they also want to have access to really cool stuff that comes from innovation and from clever industrialists like Steve Jobs, who figured out what people don't realize that they want and then created it. And the hell with the fact that it doesn't interrupt completely
But Steve,
with the so-called open web. Go ahead, John.
To talk to this, Steve. I think that the question is, where are you in the cycle, right? I think that there's in the early part of the cycle, there's inherent advantages to tightly coupled systems. And I think that now we're beginning to see the tension in that, right? Apple is not particularly good. I would say, other than Safari. I don't think any of its sort of pre-installed default apps are particularly good. And Safari, given the WebKit, open sort of plumbing underneath it, is not even really Apple. But it's but my point is that at the early stage of the development of these devices, a tightly coupled system makes sense, and then over time, the innovation gets pushed out to the edge. And so, I think that Fantastical is a better calendaring app than Apple's. There's a whole bunch of, if you look at the top of the app charts, you get, these weather apps are usually in the top 10 of paid apps, right? And so people are actually going to buy a weather app that's better than the Apple weather app. That's, you could argue that it's a commodity thing, but I think it demonstrates that Apple has not been, the tightly coupled system has its limits, and Apple is actually not that good at developing great software.
Well, I certainly agree with that, but I think that they are particularly good at opening markets, which creates demand, which creates revenue, which creates third parties, which creates competition, which then moves them forward because they have to respond. I mean, look at the Maps app. I mean, everybody complains about that Maps app, but because it's tightly coupled to Siri, I end up using it all the time because it does what it does. There may be things about the Google Map app that are superior to it, but I don't really care because if it works for me, if I say to Siri, where I want to go there, and it starts talking to me, and then when I get there, it stops talking to me. That's fantastic. I'm done.
Right.
And that produces a whole lot more data for that engine, which causes Google in this case to unbundle or to obfuscate their turn-by-turn stuff, which they held back. And we've had this argument before, but I am absolutely positive that they refused to put it there because they were trying to promote the Android devices and would not allow it on iOS. That, I think, is historical fact.
There's a difference. Apple wouldn't allow them on iOS, and then they wouldn't give an API to Apple to write Apple's app on iOS.
Okay.
They didn't trust Apple to develop the app.
All right, so
that was consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll decode the two sentences together, and it adds up to what I said.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
But I think
they wouldn't allow it, and now they allow it.
Steve,
now all of a sudden you can do it.
They wanted to write the app themselves.
Right. The navigational hook between Siri and between the mapping app, it's going to play out again, right? I mean, the user pressure and the what users want is that Siri is today is an old product. It's not a great product. It doesn't work all the time. But I as a user would like to be able to navigate to any of my apps. But Apple wants to tightly tether that into Maps so that if you just put in a mapping request, it goes straight to the default app, right?
At least initially, yeah, that's what they want.
And so it's going to play out the game.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the same. It's the same thing. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the advantage is that, I mean, we're sitting here arguing about these multiple mobile devices that have completely obliterated Windows. And who started this? Apple did. Apple made it happen.
But Apple made it happen because they had the web there as their ability to do that. I mean, the deep strategy that they got right was building WebKit and Safari, as John says, which meant that when they built the iPhone, they could immediately access all these sites. And that suddenly made me realize why they invested that effort in WebKit, because their browser was able to work on this mobile device that wasn't able to do it before.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, they were brilliant about that. I mean, they were brilliant about taking Next Step, a Unix platform, and moving it into the Mac OS. Same thing. Yeah, they are really good at using open technologies, and so is Google. This isn't really an either or. This is an and.
No.
I think somebody's made that point.
But we need to also see. So we haven't talked about Facebook much, and I'm going to run out of time soon. But and we haven't talked about Twitter. I mean, it's or Amazon. I mean, when you go through the big players out there. There are some who understand and were working with this sort of open closed model, and I think that Google is doing probably the best job of it. I think that Apple has in the past done a great job of it, but right now I think that they're showing a lot of weakness, and I think Facebook we still got to see. And
And
Twitter,
what about Twitter? I mean, Twitter doesn't
Twitter.
seem to be
they're not even playing this game.
right.
Well,
They're playing a much more sort of classic Apple game.
Well, no, because the thing that they originally did was that made them successful was they made the linkability of stuff the primary thing.
Right.
The ability to send out the short message and link out to other things is very much one of the reasons we all use Twitter, is that it's this great source of connections to other things. And they're now trying to make some of those links actually not take you away and embed you back inside Twitter. And there's some, they've already done it with photos and they've done it with a couple of other things. But news articles and things like that. So you see something in the various Twitter clients. And that gets problematic because they are now, they're actually stepping away from that, we'll do this generally, and saying, we'll make specific things for certain things. And then when they start ring fencing that, then they're sort of damaging their ability to do lots of other stuff there. So there's, they've got this motivation to make this a more integrated experience and make the Twitter experience work better, and I understand that, but they're in danger of losing the thing that they had to begin with, which was the ability to connect arbitrary things up very, very quickly and have a global conversation going on.
So, John Toshik, since we're running out of time, you want to just sort of give us a last note on what we've been talking about?
The big wrap-up, I'd say that CES, there's lots of specific, probably not open applications, kind of devices, I guess I'd say, that came out. And there's been a kind of a movement toward that unopen in a lot of these devices. The Sony TVs, for example, and these 4K TVs and 16K TVs, they're these tablet, these touch devices that are kind of like tables and things like that. Fitbit and everything. So I see that these that they're pushing the bar. I think that we're missing a lot of the utility and use cases for how they can change your life, and that's what Apple really is good at. Is determining the value proposition of whatever they come out with and how it can improve your life first, which makes it a better device because it seeds the market. And as far as the open web, I just think the web is being redefined, and it's constantly being redefined. It's kind of, ubiquitous but amorphous, and it's changing. I don't think it's going away. I think it's changing so dramatically that
I think the internet is
at
not
all
dead.
like what it looks like now.
Yeah, I just think that the actual protocols that have traditionally defined the web are becoming so pushed down in the stack that that the use of the term web has really been sort of stubbed out, except by Kevin Marks. John Borthwick, do you want to just give us a summary?
Yeah, I think that was a fair summary. I mean, I think that the world we're living in today it's very different. I mean, and I think that most people in the next 5 years will have no experience of a desktop computer, and that's a remarkable shift that we all knew was going to happen, but now it's actually happening. Is sort of changes everything, and I think that what's happening on these single-purpose device stuff is fascinating. The way that it's growing up and through platforms like Kickstarter, I think, is fascinating. We've got here at BetaWorks, we've got a MakerBot Replicator 2, which I've been playing around with this a Chinese ball that we printed out.
Yeah, I still don't get this 3D thing, but
and I've been thinking about. I think that trying to think, Steve. Trying to figure out there are these objects you can print out that are completely counterintuitive that they would actually be something you could print, right? Like learning how to think in 2D about 3D objects, or think about things in layers. I think is fascinating, and so there's. I'm going off on a tangent now. It's going to be a busy year.
Okay, well, I detect some optimism surfacing in the middle of all this counter-revolutionary garbage that I've been spewing tonight. Kevin, you have anything else, or can we release the prisoners?
Another couple of things that happened this week. There were two big security alert things going on. One was to do with Java, and one was to do with Ruby on Rails, and both of them, a security exploit was discovered. Now, what's happened with the Java one is this exploit was actually discovered 2 years ago, but we're still trying to get it patched everywhere because the Java thing runs locally, and therefore what's happened is that all the browsers have just turned off Java because it's too dangerous, which means that you can no longer run Java applets in your web browser unless you try really, really hard. The Rails one is also a significant problem, but you have to patch it on the server. And that means that when this was found, they patched Rails, and the Heroku guys within an hour said, okay, here's what you do to patch it on Heroku, type these 3 things into your app, and it's done. Now, each app has to patch that, but they're doing it on the server, and then all the clients no longer have that vulnerability. So the difference between having to touch the software on every computer in the world and touching it in the few places on the server is an enormous example of how it's much easier to change these things when we have the cloud there to connect them. And that's the piece that is important about the web that is sometimes missed with this, let's build apps for everything, because the app update cycle ends up being much longer.
Right. So I'll summarize this by saying that it's a lot easier to do that technically. It's a lot harder to do it economically. And that's what's happening.
No, it's way cheaper economically as well, because you're only
no. I'm not talking
building
about
it out.
I'm talking about how you get to the point where you've got a huge problem that you can solve by hitting the server. Getting there is an enormously complicated and expensive task in terms of harnessing multiple companies and the content industry, as well as in other words, as Jimmy Iovine said in some interview that I was reading, he said that this is a record producer who's been enormously successful for years and years, and he said they finally figured out the tech companies just don't get how to make a good record. In other words, the content is what drives these platforms, not the other way around. And I think he's right and he's wrong, but the part where he's right is going to make for some very interesting times, which is why I think that AirPlay is going to be a huge driver for the connection between CES and all these screens and and this device.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, John. I want to thank John Borthwick. I want to thank Kevin Marks. I want to thank John Toshek. I want to thank Rackspace, and particularly Rob Legess, without which the show would not be here. I would like to thank NewTek and their TriCaster. And I want to thank our producer and director, Tina Chase Gillmor. And the folks in the chat room. I don't have time to read what you guys are saying anymore. It looks like it was, in many cases, more interesting than what I had to say. I want to thank everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.